Hey guys, welcome back to Wheels Through Time. It's week 3 of Drive for History. Big fun week ahead. This week we're highlighting machines from the glory days of American motorcycle racing. So 1920s, 30s, 40s, some of the rarest and most storied machines here at the museum we're going to be bringing to you guys, firing them up. Today we're highlighting the 1924 Harley-Davidson Jdca Outlaw Racer. Now we call this bike here at the museum the Carl Duran bike. Carl Duran was a Minnesota guy, raced this bike dating all the way back to 1929, raced it actually all very successfully up through the 1950s. Now, Duran began racing at the age of 19 in 1929 aboard this motorcycle. The machine's a totally modified, what we call outlaw racing machine. So based loosely on the factory race bikes of the era, Duran used actually a little bit more primitive 19-teens era factory short coupled loop racing frame. So what we mean by short coupled is that rear wheel is brought way in towards the seat post here. Now traditionally on the road model bikes of this era, got a big toolbox or big oil tank in between that seat post in the rear wheel, excuse me. The short coupled racing frames, again, short wheelbase helps you get around that track better. These machines were raced on tracks all the way down maybe 3/8 of a mile, half mile, up to 1 mile. This bike, actually, and quite a storied bike it is, set 1 mile speed records all the way into the 1950s, if you can believe that. So, but the machine, modified factory short coupled racing frame from the teens. It's traditionally a loop frame. Now, what we notice with a lot of the race bikes that we talk about here at the museum, and there's over 150 racing motorcycles here at Wheels Through Time, really big focus on the board track racing machines. There's over 24 incredibly rare, incredibly historic racing machines from the teens and 20s here. Most of those factory board track bikes, or as we like to call them, board track bikes. Reality is they probably raced on boards and dirt. Most of those racing machines of the era had what we call a Keystone Frame. Really early on, they used the loop frame. Loop frame's just like what it sounds like. The frame actually extends down from the neck here, and there's a loop tube that moves all the way down and comes back up, cradling the engine all the way back up to the seat post. So right here is your main loop. What Duran did was he actually cut the loop out of this incredibly rare frame. Now, to think about cutting a loop out of a frame like this today, frames like this, absolutely unobtainium. I only know of a handful of these that exist, period. Duran, back in 1929, modified this frame, cut the loop out, and keystoned it. So when you keystone a frame, you actually, by removing the loop, you allow the engine to be dropped considerably lower in the frame. As you can see, next to no ground clearance down there. Maybe you got 2.5 inches or so. Then the engine actually ties the frame together itself. There is no loop down on the bottom, so they use the 2 motor mounts here to tie the front and the rear sections, and then actually use engine plates. And Carl Duran has actually fabbed up his own kind of unique engine plates, very different than a factory standard racing frame of the era. Duran's dropped this motor super low in the frame, actually moved it a little bit further forward. Machine is really designed for half mile and 1 mile racing. And as I said, Duran set speed records on this bike all the way into the 1950s. 74 cubic inch motor. Now, another kind of aspect of the outlaw machines, traditional racing during this time, usually 500cc or 1000cc, so that's 30 cubic inches, or right at 61 cubic inches, were the professional racing classes. Factories put big effort, big resources into extremely limited amounts or limited production racing engines. 1000cc's the twins were. Now, all of your outlaw bikes, outlaw racing, there was no displacement limit. So it was bore it, stroke it, bump the compression, especially grind the cams, lighten up the flywheels, improve your porting, you name it. Everything was fair game, not limited by a displacement. So this machine happens to be 74, possibly 80 cubic inches. I personally have never seen the inside of this engine. I'm not sure if my dad's ever had the motor apart. Now, my dad used to race this bike at Wauseon in Davenport, Iowa, antique motorcycle meets, as far back as the mid-1980s. So many laps Dale's put on this machine. Absolutely a treat to see. ultra low frame, super short wheelbase. Front end is actually a rigid front end for a lot of these half-mile racing bikes of these 20s and or teens, 20s and 30s era. They'd use the Harley Davidson rigid front end. So zero suspension on this bike. It's really made to be on the gas all the time. Here's actually some incredible stuff from the history of this bike, all out of the scrapbook. You can see here's some photos. I love this one. This is a photo of the bike. Now different paint job on the gas tank. You can see the fork was a lighter color. Same Jdca engine. Just undoubtedly the same bike. It looks like it probably has the same tires on it. Bearcat Speedway. Here's a picture of Carl in the 1940s out in front of a bunch of Harley WRs and Indian Sport Scouts. So 1924 motorcycle. Again, the guy held at the Minnesota Fairgrounds, held the 1 mile speed record for the state of Minnesota all the way through, or actually, excuse me, set it in 1946, rebroke it multiple times, 46, 47, 48. So really, really incredible stuff. Here's a picture of Duran himself next to Derby Weston, who was apparently the runner-up state champion of Minnesota. Now, in 1936, Duran won the Minnesota State Championship, the Iowa State Championship, and got second place in the Illinois State Championship on this motorcycle. The bike is virtually as raced since Duran owned the bike, as raced. Here's another great picture of my dad on the bike. This is probably from Wauseon, or it looks actually a little bit more like the Davenport track. A little bit more bank to it, probably 1990s. Awesome photo. There he is at speed. No steel shoe for Dale. Got the visor up. Probably running 70 or 80 miles an hour there. Just really neat stuff. Anytime we get to fiddle with a motorcycle that my dad used to race, incredibly special for me. So a little bit more details on the bike, guys, what we're looking at. Single speed, no brakes, no clutch. It's direct drive. It means when the motor's running, the wheel's spinning. You're locked into 1 gear ratio. So you can see they got the big 48 tooth sprocket in the back, standard ratio of the Harley Davidson compensator countershaft sprocket there. And then it looks like probably a 13 tooth, I haven't counted, but probably a 13 tooth motor sprocket. So knowing this sort of gearing, I race it's a very similar machine to this on half-mile tracks. I run one smaller tooth on the motor. Everything else is the same. We run about 80 miles an hour. So this thing's probably set up at this point to go 85, possibly even 90 miles an hour. So 1924 Jdca engine. The Jdca debuted in 1924. It was Harley Davidson's first kind of hot stock engine. So bigger intake manifold, bigger intake ports, bigger carburetor. Jdca, or 1924 especially, last year of the short sprocket shaft. So it's the last year of engine that you can fit in this short coupled chassis other than your factory racing motors of slightly later years. So the perfect hot rod outlaw motor. Now the top end of the Jdcas is also ultra special. They put the spark plugs in a really unique special place on this top end. Now keep in mind 74 cubic inches, that's a 4-inch stroke, 3 7/16 bore, same standard displacement and same standard dimensions, I should say, all the way up through Harley pan heads and shovel heads. So that 4-inch by 3 7/16 74 cubic inch job was kind of a Harley staple. Spark plugs in these cylinders, they were really playing around with how to get more power out of these engines. They moved the spark plugs from right here on the side of the pocket. You can see the front one here, they tipped it slightly closer to the bore, to the top of the piston, and then the rear one all together over the top of the piston. Ultra rare cylinders. Finding a pair of these cylinders today is next to impossible. Definitely made a difference when it came to making power and putting it to the rear wheel. So super cool, short, skinny little racing gas tanks. Again, little short rear fender, pedals are fixed in place, big reinforced and beefed up handlebars. A lot of photos of Carl going down on this bike. So as they can say, when it comes to racing, it's not if, it's when. Carl got busted up plenty of times on this machine. You can actually see there he is going high side and then You can actually see this handlebars already had tape on them then. I can only imagine a race or a wreck like that would have bent them up even more. So these things have been bent and tweaked a number of times, taped them up to make them a little bit stronger. And there you have it, guys. We're going to fire this bike up right now. Now, prior to the test start yesterday, this bike hadn't been run in probably 15 years. So we're going to fire this thing up. Again, no brakes, no clutch, direct drive. So when you fire a machine like this up, you prime it by spinning that rear wheel over, get some fuel into the carburetor, kind of preset the throttle. Chris is going to hold the front of the handlebars, and then I'm just going to flick that rear wheel and hope we can get the thing to pop over. So here we go. 74 cubic inches ought to be a little bit more difficult than your standard 61-inch racing motor of the same day. Okay, we got fuel in the carburetor. Preset the throttle just a little bit, and hopefully in a pull or two we'll be running. Man, does that thing make some noise or what? Little tiny pipes are popping and cracking. Just an awesome machine. You can hear that is no stock motor, 74 cubic inches, maybe even a little bit bigger. Hopped up, big compression, special cylinders, special cam and flywheels, all wrapped in that ultra rare short coupled chassis. Really, really awesome piece of work. Proud to display this machine here at the museum. It's been in the Wheels Through Time collection, I think, since 1985 or 1986. I actually found a really neat article here from a fella that sent the article in. He was actually a Minnesota resident and knew about this bike. He said Carl was living in a trailer park in Minnesota and the bike sat in his living room. He actually tried to buy it off Carl numerous times, never could get the deal done. As it would be years later, Carl sold it to a young kid who sold it to my dad, and the bike's now here for all time. Proud to bring it to you guys on Drive for History. Make sure you check out tons more of our videos. We're going to be bringing you guys all new content all winter and spring. Make sure you tune in, check out wheelsthroughtime.com, support the museum today. Remember, you guys help keep us the museum that runs. See ya.